Welcome to Own Damn Guru podcast, where I aim to create an overview of the soul's journey, the human experience, and beyond for you to get a better understanding of yourself, to easier navigate your own journey, and eventually become your own damn guru. Hi, and welcome back. As you might know by now, my name is Sanna. I'm 38 years old and live in Stockholm, Sweden, with my 6-year-old daughter. But that's about all you might know about me, and I'd like to change that. I want to dedicate these upcoming episodes to my greatest teacher, the reason I awakened to this journey, the reason I've done all the work before I could find it in me to do it for myself, my guiding light and shining star, my living miracle, my beautiful and amazing daughter, Greta. I love you to infinity and beyond. More about her and the importance of her in my life later on. The following episodes are going to be about me and my journey. My reason for doing these episodes is that when I was in my darkest time, I was desperate to find someone who shared their struggles, to feel that I wasn't alone, to hear someone sharing not only their wins, their best angle, their good days, their glossy, happy, shiny Instagram life. I wanted to find someone real that authentically relayed what their journey had been like before they resurfaced and came back on top. So I'm hoping to be that person to others that might be in need of just that. I'm going to start from the beginning, but try to move swiftly into the most pivotal parts where I go a bit deeper. Growing up, I thought I was doing just fine. I knew nothing else than my exact reality. I had a loving mother and father, three lovely siblings, a roof over my head, food on the table, some pets, and a lot of fun. My mom divided her time with being an author and a stay-at-home mom. My dad worked as an entrepreneur within physical data security. I had my issues here and there, but I always managed. I had a lot of friends. I did great in school and did okay in sports. One of my most apparent struggles during my upbringing was my stomach. It always ached. Many times I laid in fetal position trying to hold myself through the pain. I went to see many doctors, but I was always put into the vague box of having IBS, aka irritable bowel syndrome. After finishing my first 12 years of school, I furthered my education at university by studying economics. It wasn't until my third year into my studies, when I was about 25, that alarms started going off. It felt as if my soul was literally dying. I was mainly studying because that was the right thing to do. It was a safe bet, a good foundation for my continued economic safety and career. And since I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, economics was a broad and good way to go. But the depression crept in. This feeling was utterly new to me. I was so used to performing, achieving results, regardless of my state of being or how I felt. Accomplishments above all. But with this depressive state, I couldn't find it in me to even open the books needed to pass the next exam. I felt like a failure. But at the same time, something rebellious inside me was growing. It's like I wanted to scream out loud into the abyss and hope someone would hear me. I couldn't continue doing what I was doing. But at the same time, I was really struggling to find a way to tell my dad. How would he react if his straight A student good girl told him that she was dropping out of her university studies with just 1 year to go? I knew what he would say. You just have 1 year to go. You can do it. But I really couldn't. I would have rather died. So I dropped off, feeling quite lost, and decided to go into event marketing, where I got to meet a lot of people. I got to work physically instead of spending my entire days on my computer. The depression started to subside, with this entrapped feeling loosening its grip a little bit. After a while, I changed jobs and went into a music startup. I have always loved music in a way that is indescribable. I live music, I breathe music, I am music. Many times I had contemplated going into the music industry, but always stopped myself because I didn't want to taint the most beautiful thing in the world to me with the ugly sides of the industry. But here came an opportunity to create a fan app, which was an opportunity I couldn't resist. I was really starting to thrive again, with the excitement of engaging artists and fans in combination with a lot of travels. Things started falling into place. That's when I got the call. My dad had just been to the oncologist, and the verdict was clear. It is cancer. I felt my whole world started to crumble. Even though I had 1 year earlier started to mini rebel against my father's grip on me and my future, and started to ask myself what I needed to actually survive, the grip was still firm. He was my entire foundation. I lived for him and his approval. All I wanted was to make him proud. He was the kind of person that could walk into any room and demand, attract, and deserve everyone's attention with his mere presence. He was a good-hearted person with a lot of love for everyone, but that love was shown in the way of him seeing everyone's potential and wanting them to achieve that. And the potential he saw in me was endless. There are so many things I could tell you about what happened in the following months. I could tell you about the pain of witnessing your hero get thrown down from his pedestal and dragged through the dirt, him slowly withering away right in front of my eyes, and there's nothing I could do about it. Him not accepting his fate, thus leaving his family without emotional closure. Him continuing working, and between all that work and his doctor's appointments, there wasn't any energy left for his family. The disappointment in him accepting visitors outside the family at any time, but as soon as they were gone, so was his energy. Witnessing my mom desperately trying to find any remedy that could help his fatal doom. The look in his eyes with every humiliating situation that this process entailed. Him no longer eating, the endless pain and suffering, me watching him taking his last breaths with our entire family surrounding him. The total crumbling of my foundation after the fact. There are many things I could tell you, but there are even more important things to be told. It took a good year for my grief to subside from an acute, tangibly physical stage into something more manageable. As I was going through all of this, I also found myself in a toxic relationship. I was doing everything I could to make this person happy and feeling loved, but no matter what I did, it always ended up with him being upset with me. My nervous system was constantly on high alert, and my awareness of him and his mood hypervigilant. I had to find the strength in me, despite this weakened state, to make a difficult decision and end this chapter. I eventually did and started focusing on me again. Life was looking up again, and so was my spirit and body. That's when I fell madly in love with a man. It was a beautiful ride through the magical coasts of Amalfi, merging our lives, exploring the world and each other, bringing out sides in each other that was deeply longing to come out. Since we worked together, I had also got myself into a new work path. A longing to become more free and creative had led me to want to explore entrepreneurship. My sister and another guy had started to form this idea of creating a matching tool between talents and companies to not only match on hard facts, but also soft values. I have always loved talents, regardless if it's been a musical talent or just someone who really loves what they do and is really good at it. So this project fired my engines. After recruiting yet another guy, the four of us were off on this adventure. A while into this endeavor, I got pregnant. It wasn't planned, and obviously there's never good timing when becoming pregnant. But this felt like an especially poor timing since we were in the starting phase of my first baby, our company. Throughout this entire pregnancy, there was a lot of grief, sorrow, and heartaches, and I will get to that. But one of the first ones was when I was about to tell my sister I was pregnant. The moment wasn't filled with joy of her having a future niece in my belly. It was about the knot I had in my stomach due to the codependency I had deeply ingrained in my system, and that I had to tell her that I was going to abandon our mutual baby for a while for my actual human baby. This entire pregnancy was permeated with worry from the get go. I had early ultrasounds due to me being abnormally big around the belly for my expected pregnancy week. They suspected I was further along than the initial calculations. The ultrasound showed the opposite, though. Was there even a viable pregnancy in there? We had to let time pass and reassess. This experience made me discover how much I really wanted this child. Once you step into that heart and head space, there's not much else that really matters. My heart was breaking for the possibility that this might not turn out the way I wanted it to. Weeks passed and another ultrasound confirmed heartbeats. I was so happy and relieved. The constant nausea and fatigue was really killing me though. Around week 18, it was time for the big ultrasound that evaluated all the organs and the viability of the fetus. The anticipation for this day had really been festering since the initial scare early on in the pregnancy. I was trying to read every facial expression of the technician as she went through organ by organ. Everything on her face looked fine until it didn't. Her final summary stated that everything looked good with the fetus, but she found an unidentified object or mass in connection to the uterus. Since her expertise didn't involve anything outside the actual fetus, she didn't want to guess what it was. She said that she would refer me to a specialist. Yet again, leaving in an appointment with very mixed feelings. The fetus was fine. We got the beautiful news that we were expecting a baby girl, but there was still something wrong. That very same night, I started to bleed. At this point, I was in week 18 with 5 weeks to go until my fetus would even be considered to be a child. 5 weeks until they would even try to save her. The following weeks were kind of a blur. In awaiting the appointment of the specialist, I had a punch ticket to the gynecology emergency. I went in and out of there, always with the same answer. It's normal to bleed when you're pregnant. But I knew it wasn't normal. I had never been pregnant before, but my entire being knew this wasn't normal. Every time I went to the bathroom, the blood in the toilet and on my pad stared me straight in the face. Finally, the day for the appointment at the specialist arrived. I was desperate for answers, even though I was at the same time terrified of getting them. But sometimes the limbo of not knowing is even worse than actually getting the news, regardless if it is considered good or bad. Into the examination room came a very straightforward, to the point, matter-of-fact older man. I was calmed by his seniority and experience, but vulnerably scared of his directness. The verdict came in, and it came in hard. You have a hematoma, which is an inner bleeding that is causing your uterus to have early onset contractions, and you are likely to have a late miscarriage. If a bigger bleeding occurs, you should go to the gynecology emergency because that means it's probably starting. Whew. I left with very heavy steps from that examination room. Still, with a little sense of validation of someone actually knowing what was wrong, validating the severity of the situation, and not just brushing me off with some kind of "it's normal" attitude. That very same night, I woke up just after barely falling asleep, feeling as if my water broke or me wetting myself. In my drowsy state, I suddenly felt wide awake. There wasn't any clear liquid that had poured out of me. It was blood everywhere. As I made my way into the bathroom, it was as if someone was holding a bottle upside down, just pouring blood everywhere. It looked like a massacre had taken place. I went into some kind of zombie state. Started to pack my things that I might need for having this miscarriage at the hospital. I thought I would probably need to stay there for a couple of days. As I entered the same emergency room that I had already been to so many times before, there was a part of me that wanted to scream, "I told you so." But I was too scattered and vulnerable to even get my words together on what had actually happened. Since I had been brushed off before, I had managed to take a couple of pictures of the bloodbath at home, which I shoved in their faces. My silent, rebellious act to make them witness the massacre. The minutes before someone came to examine me and run the tests felt like hours. I faced away from them when they were doing the ultrasound. I didn't want to hear them say it, say that it was over. And then I heard it, the heartbeat. I looked at their surprised faces as they told me that the circumstances for the fetus was still good. The fetus was still viable. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. There still was a chance. There still was hope. In disbelief, I allowed for it to sink in slowly through a crack in the armor of my heart. Now, a race towards the clock started. They needed to get this bleeding under control long enough for her to also become potentially viable on the outside of the womb. They put me on all types of IVs and pills for the bleeding to coagulate and the contractions to subside. I was admitted to the women's clinic where no men were allowed due to the nature of other women's reason for being there. So all alone, I shook, puked, and cried my way through that night. In part due to the trauma of the entire event and my state of shock. In part due to the medicines they were giving me. One of the medicines being Bricanyl, with the active substance terbutaline, which in high doses through IV is known to have the side effects of what feels like a panic attack, with heart palpitations, nausea, vomiting, etc. Little did I know this was just the beginning of one hell of a journey. Days passed, weeks passed. The coagulation pills were doing their job, keeping the bleeding in check. We eventually crossed the magical border of week 22. She was now medically considered to be a child and no longer just a fetus. I then got transferred to specialists that kept a close eye on my pregnancy weekly, and I no longer had to endure the humiliation of the gynecology emergency. I was to let them know as soon as any change occurred. Any fresh blood, any increased contractions, and so on. At one of my weekly checkups in week 24, They examined me as per usual. During each examination for the last couple of weeks, my cervix had been getting closer and closer to being obliterated. Only this time it turned out that I was 1 centimeters open, which is about half an inch. When giving birth, you are fully dilated at 10 centimeters, and usually you get to stay at the hospital for delivery if you're 3 to 4 centimeters open or more within a normal pregnancy. Since this was a high risk pregnancy, they decided to keep me overnight for observation and to increase the efforts of keeping her in there. So they gave me everything they had to keep it that way. They also gave me shots that would expedite her lung development, since the lung continued to develop until week 28 during a pregnancy, but she was to come earlier than that. For a week, I resided in the antenatal clinic. With every little sensation of change, I was to call upon exams. They poked and prodded me endlessly with their steel appliances up my vagina. Most of the time, I was hooked up to a CTG for monitoring the baby's heart rate and the contractions. One night, I had just finished getting ready to go to sleep when I saw some fresh blood on my pad. First, I thought to myself, that's probably nothing. After crying wolf for what felt like 100 times, you get kind of jaded. But something in me said that it was probably better to be safe than sorry. So I pressed the red button and felt a bit of crying wolf energy from the nurse as well. But she also leaned into the better safe than sorry vibe. It turns out I was 5 centimeters open. In other terms, halfway to being fully dilated. All of a sudden, the big button was pushed and I was rushed into the maternity ward to give birth. All thoughts and feelings were rushing through my body and mind. I had, ever since I started bleeding, had this sensation of being extremely fragile. Like any step I made could cause this whole thing to go wrong. So even though I was extremely scared of what was to come, my body longed for not being responsible for the outcome anymore. Almost the same weird feeling as an initial feeling I had when my dad died. In a way, I was relieved it was over due to all the pain he was in. And don't get me wrong, I would have endured anything to keep my baby girl in there full term, but this was out of my hands. And at least now, since we had reached 25, there was a chance of her surviving. First 2 hours went by in a quite calm fashion. The midwife was in and out. When I had to pee, I had to do it in a bowl by the bed since we weren't taking any chances with her slipping into the toilet. I was on firm bed rest. We tried our best to keep the mood up with some music. One of the few videos that I have from me giving birth is one where Sam Smith's song is played. But you can lay with me so it doesn't hurt. Oh, won't you stay with me, 'cause you are all I need. The contractions started to increase, and with some help from laughing gas, I took them in stride. All of a sudden, I felt a big shift inside me, like a drop had occurred. No one except me and my daughter's father was in the room. In an alarming fashion, I made sure that the red button was pushed. In came the midwife in a not so alarming fashion. I tried to convey what my intuition knew, that it was time. She didn't get the urgency. Mind me, I was still in my fancy mesh hospital knickers. After removing those, she quickly realized that the head was showing. And just to be clear, I was going through a natural birth with a baby with the size of a tennis ball. So the urgency was all of a sudden switched up. I hadn't had time to go to any classes or retrieve information about delivering a baby, especially not a premature one. I had spent the time and energy I had on thinking about everything after the actual birth. So I asked the midwife, "What do I do?" And she answered with the, at the time, provoking sentence, "Follow your body," which I clearly had dissociated from, which I obviously didn't understand at the time. Either way, from that point, it's pretty much a blur. A lot of doctors rushed into the room. I remember the notion of them wanting to put her up on my belly at least, since the umbilical cord wouldn't be long enough to reach the chest. But it wasn't long enough to do even that. There was blood everywhere. There was a plastic bag involved for her to lay in to keep warm. I didn't get to see her at all after delivering her. All of a sudden, everyone had left the room to take care of my baby girl. So there I was, no idea of the status of her viability, and all I wanted to do was to get to her. But I had forgotten about the placenta, and the placenta had no intention of leaving anytime soon. It was stuck. They pushed with all their might on top of my belly over and over again, which was already painfully sore. They had me emptied of pee through a catheter. They applied acupuncture needles on my feet. Was it even between my toes? Could have been. I don't remember. I just know that if it would have taken any longer, I would have been rushed into surgery. When it was finally out, I just started crying uncontrollably. The complex relief of having my body back, of being able to go to my daughter, and as I mentioned before, not having the responsibility inside my body anymore. At this point, I had also received an image of her via text confirming that she was still alive, and I also got my first little glance of her. I had my traditional celebratory Swedish flag tray with a sandwich and a glass of juice and a quick shower. I was so grateful that I was able to get out of bed and go see her. Obviously sore and tired, but at least not in surgery. I entered the room carefully. There she was, this tiny, tiny creature that I had dreamed about and tried to envision so many times. Weighing only 650 grams, which equals barely 23 ounces. Like a little bird that could fit in the palm of my hand. As I approached her, they were still doing an ultrasound on her brain. Researchers had approached us while still in the antenatal unit and asked us if they could include our daughter in their study. They said that children with this level of prematurity have very sensitive brains. The sound of a door closing could cause a brain bleed. And unfortunately, the hospital had an old part and a new part, which was attached through an underground culvert of over a kilometer between them, which is more than half a mile. And since the maternity ward was in the old part and the neonatal unit was in the new part, she obviously had to be transported from one to the other. And the high risk of this transportation ushered them to do this ultrasound of the brain before transporting her, so that they would know if she had any damages to her brain before the transportation. Luckily, she didn't. I approached her as this procedure was undergoing, both with a childlike wonder, but also a bit terrified, as if I was admiring a piece of art, a glass sculpture, afraid that it might break if I touched it. I had just become a mother, but I was also totally in the hands of the medical staff that were trying to keep her alive. So I felt I had to ask, can I touch her? Which I could. So I placed my hand on this tiny, tiny human, my human, the human my body had been creating from its first cells into this living, breathing, tiny thing. I was in awe. I was tired. I was confused. I was totally stepping into the unknown on all levels. But at least I now knew my why. Stronger than ever, if not for the first time ever. She was my why. Thank you so much for listening to this first part of the 3 episodes of my journey. I hope you enjoyed the first part, and I hope to see you come back for the second and third part. Until then,